Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another live edition of the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. Of course, I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, and we're glad to have everyone back with us this evening, whether you're going to watch live or for those of you that watch the show on one of our recorded venues. We appreciate your participation. The other thing is, it's great to have the audience that we have and the participation and people watching the show because it's due to people like you that has actually helped us make one of the top 25 podcasts to watch up here in Northern Virginia in Fairfax County. So we appreciate that from all of our audience. Before we get going, of course, I also want to talk about our appreciation for our sponsors for our show. And we've had these sponsors for quite a while. They've been great. First, I want to just say a shout out to Quest Jewelers in Merrifield, Virginia. Pete and Juan Tane have been outstanding. And folks, I got to tell you, they've got some beautiful stuff in their showroom. I know I've told you guys before from firsthand experience. I have purchased some beautiful stuff in there, whether you want something custom made or something from the showroom, they'll be more than happy to help you. So take a look at it, questjewelers.com. There's their number. Give them a call. I also want to thank Nationwide IT Services. As I've told you, NIS is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business run by a retired Army Warrant Officer, C.K. Park. C.K. and his crew have offices and employees around the United States working for a variety of clients from both federal, state agencies to private businesses. Well, if you need something, then you need help with them, whether it's from IT, it's security, it's performance management, professional development, training. He's got a crew that can help you. So give CK and them a call, and I'm sure they would be willing to talk with you to help you out. All right, so I want to get into this evening's guests with us tonight. And of course, tonight we want to welcome Matthew Hill. Matthew is a managing partner and attorney for Hill and Ponton in Florida. And Matthew, I'm going to talk a little bit more about you, but first, let me just say welcome and thank you for taking the time to come on the show.
Well, Paul, thank you. And I just want to say I appreciate you, not only your service while in service, but the way you continue to serve veterans and just make sure they're informed on what's going on and benefits like disability benefits, but all the other topics you talk about for them. Thank you for that.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why we do this, of course, Matt. So, we're happy to continue and happy to have folks like you on and other veterans on the show. So for our audience, just a little bit about Matt. Matt, of course, is in Florida. And, of course, as is our studio. So most of you know our studio head is in Florida as well. Now, the interesting thing is, Matt went to the University of Florida and earned a bachelor's degree in Spanish and then went to law school. And he attended law school at the University of Florida as well. And then I think you spent a year in Uruguay perfecting your Spanish, didn't you, Matt?
I did.
Yeah. So he's been a little busy, but after graduation, he was a judicial law clerk to the Honorable Ann Conway, the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida. He also assisted Judge Conway with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta, Georgia. So he's been around a little bit, got a number of years of experience there with the law. And of course, main practice areas is veterans disability law and Social Security law. Now, I will tell you that Matt has also written a number of publications, and we'll talk about those a little bit. Several of them have been turned into ebooks and are on their website. So we're going to talk about this, but I thought it was good to have Matt come on and talk about what he and his organization are doing. And even though part of what they do, part of the area they do is a fee for service, they also do help out veterans and provide information, point them to resources, provide resources on their website, and do pro bono work helping veterans and their families. So I want to welcome you, Matt, and I've already said thank you for coming on, and we're really glad to have you as a guest to help us get information out, especially with what you guys specialize in, VA disability and Social Security. Because I got to tell you, so many veterans that I talk to and run into, and then I read, blogs and websites, And I see these veterans talking about how much time they spend struggling with the VA to, try and get their benefits and go back and forth. So I know that a large portion of what you guys do is very valuable. But I want to start off by asking you first, you went to law school and racked up some pretty good experience there. How did you get into the organization you're in and dealing specifically with veterans disability and Social Security?
Well, I thank you for that lengthy introduction. You make me sound a lot better than I am. I think I look better on paper, so hopefully I can live up to some of that live. So Paul, I honestly feel like I was born at the right time. I got out of law school. I went to work for a judge. My parents started Hill and Ponton back in the mid 80s, and they did Social Security and a lot of different aviation and different kind of plaintiffs work. And I wasn't particularly drawn to that, but right when I got out from working with my judge, the VA opened up VA disability for veterans. And what I mean by that was in 1865, the government allowed a person to charge a veteran $5 to be able to represent them for VA for a claim. And in 1867, they raised that to $10, and that $10 cap stuck all the way up until 2007. So I knew attorneys who actually had had FBI come into their office because they thought that they had charged the veteran a fee. So,
really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that's interesting. I was not aware of that.
Yeah. So there really was I'd say there was probably under 100 practitioners who practiced VA law before 2007. My parents both had practiced back in the 90s, but there were just so few cases because all those cases were up at the Veterans Court that they couldn't really make a big practice. So anyway, here I come off working for this great federal judge, and my parents say, hey, look, we've got a Social Security practice that has a lot of veterans. Our name's already been out there. We're both busy with our practices, but if this is something you'd like to do, we'd love you to jump in. So I got to jump right in. We had, a couple hundred clients to begin with. And I just kind of, just stuck my nose to the grindstone to learn how to do it. And before long, both my parents got so excited about what we were doing that we ended up closing the aviation practice. And then we ended up closing the Social Security practice so that we're all in just on VA because we love it so much. So it's been a fun ride.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, I mean, I'm sure, you're not doing it for the recognition, and, your parents were doing that as well. But it's just so good to see modern organizations, especially those such as yours, that will take the time and the effort, because I'm sure, you've heard more, as much, if not more, from veterans and their families about their experiences and their difficulties in trying to navigate through the VA. I think it's getting a little bit better, but, over the past, I would say 15 years, I know it's been a real challenge. And the reason why I say that is because during my civil service career, I actually worked for the VA. Oh. But I was a budget and business manager, operations manager for the employee education systems in VHA. So, I was not tied directly to working with veteran clients, but I worked with a lot of people there who took their job very seriously. And sometimes were often disappointed because their hands were tied trying to get things done and help. So it's great that you guys have moved forward in that. And so you started doing this. And how was it when you first started off really getting into it? What was the experience like?
Felt like I was in the Wild West. It seemed like there were no rules, there were no playbooks. You go into other areas of law and there's all this established law you turn to, and how to talk to a jury, how to make an opening argument. There was none of that when I came in. And so, one of the things I did that I'm most proud of is that I learned just by digging in both to the law and the medicine. And what I did is I blogged about it. I just put up anything I'd learned, I'd write a blog about. Oh, wow. And so it was kind of like I'd learn and my audience would learn along with me. A lot of those folks didn't need me any more than reading what I wrote. But, some folks read it and realized, hey, that I might be able to help them. But it was difficult. I feel like I made a lot of trial and error mistakes because I didn't have anybody else to teach me what to do. Yeah. but it was also, it was really fun. You know, it was like, it was kind of me and my vet against the world because we didn't have anybody else a lot of times to rely on. So it was really interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, in looking at your website too, um, I get the feeling I look at all the stuff that you guys provide on there, and there's the website there, hillandponton.com, for those of you that are interested and want to take a look, of course. But Matt and his folks there on the website, I mean, I thought it was really interesting to look on there and see stuff like, you've got disability calculator up there, you've got your e-tools, your e-books, you've got guides. And of course, I know that you were the author of several of these books and turned them into e-books, the PTSD guide, and different things like that. So a guide to VA compensation, I'm sure that was a bit of a doozy to write as well. But
it ain't riveting reading. I will tell you that it's definitely technical, and I think I've probably put plenty of people to sleep who tried to read it.
Well, I have to tell you though, I was on there looking at your disability calculators that you have, and I thought it was interesting that you even have one about that helps calculate back pay for veterans who are ended up finally awarding and backdating awards. And I have never seen that before on any other site like this that I've been to include, the VA itself. And I don't know if you've ever looked at the calculator on the VA site, but it's about as clear as muddy water.
Yeah.
But the one you guys have up, at least if you know what your disabilities are, whether or not they're not specifically listed, but you can put up the percentages, and it pretty much calculates it automatically and easily for you. And I thought, boy, this would have been nice to have a couple years ago when I was going through, so much of that for mine. So, you have all of those tools up on the website, which I thought was, really, really interesting. So you guys are providing all these free tools for people that visit your website, your ebooks. You guys specialize in PAC law, disability, veterans appeals. So I'd like for you, if you would, to kind of talk to us a little bit more about some of those areas and what you're doing. And I'd like you to feel comfortable too, of course, to share some experiences that you've had with it, because I think this would be something that'd be beneficial for our audience definitely to hear, not only to talk about some of the specific areas you guys work in, but some of your personal experiences, because somebody out there is going to hear something that sounds familiar to them.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that research, Paul, and checking out our site. So I got to admit to you, when we'd win a case and it'd go back 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we'd ended up working out by hand. We kind of figured out an Excel spreadsheet on how to do these things. And finally we said, we need a darn calculator. And so we created that in-house. And again, we thought, let's just put it up on our website, because Lord knows we're not the only ones trying to figure this out and make sure the VA is actually paying the right amount back.
Yeah.
And we've done that with a lot of stuff. One of the things we did in the last 3 years that I'm really excited about is our toxic base map. We kind of went around the attorneys in our group, and we'd say, hey, look, my vet was at Fort McClellan, or my vet was at El Toro, and he's got these crazy disabilities. And then somebody would find that there was arsenic in the ground, or that there were different, PCE in the water or something. And so soon enough, we had kind of written out all this stuff, and we were like, hey, let's just put this on a map. And then once we actually started looking at bases and what was there and what disabilities they cause, it made our lives frankly easier internally, because we were able to link a lot of disabilities our vets had to something we weren't necessarily looking at first. And then we've had a lot of great feedback from vets saying, hey, I was at this base and now I've got this strange cancer. And we were able to say, well, look, that's pretty rare that you have this cancer. And oh, by the way, there was this horrible toxin there in the soil. So we've really enjoyed, I think that's one of the most fun things we've done, is done the factual discovery. Because I feel like the thing with VA is there are a lot of good people that work at VA, but the workload a lot of them have is just not sustainable. And it does not allow them to do the extra push to actually dig into a file, to dig into, where this vet was, what exposures he could have had. Because it's just, they just have so much information coming at them at all angles. So I harp on the VA, but I do admit I've had my pleasure of working with a lot of good people there. But it's hard for them to really do this kind of digging and meet their quota. And so that's been kind of one of the fun things we've done working with our vets, is realizing, seeing patterns and trying to then put that all together, like the map or just, the calculators. We have another map for Vietnam for veterans or veterans who served offshore, so they can calculate where their ship was in conjunction with the shore to make sure they can claim they were inside the territorial seas, and then submit that to the VA as well. So, and the cool thing about that one, which I really love, is we have veterans who actually submit us records, deck logs from their ships, so that then we can put that in the computer. And so, the more vets help us, the more we can help other vets with that. And so it's really cool, because it gives them this spit out reading of their lat and long, how far it was from the shore of Vietnam. And again, that was almost like, what do they call it? Crowd surfing, where a bunch of people come in and help all together. So I've loved this part of the job, the factual. I wanted to go back to a point you made as far as, the VA and has it improved and what I've seen over the years. Back in 2007, when I first started, overwhelming majority of my vets were all Vietnam vets. And the pattern I saw that crushed me was I'd see these fellows who'd come back from Vietnam, they'd be discharged, they'd apply for benefits and just get denied across the board and just leave. Just put their head down, go to work, start a family, just go on with their lives. And then 20, 30 years later, they'd apply for benefits. And I'd look at their lives, folks who'd gone through multiple marriages, folks who lost job after job, and just see how their experience in Vietnam had affected them, yet they'd not gotten the help they needed. Yeah. And it pained me so much to see that. But to your point about how things have changed with the VA and things have changed with our DOD, I see similar patterns now with the folks coming out, especially the folks who've been in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I see them coming back, applying for especially mental health disabilities and then other, orthopedic disabilities that happen to them. And instead of just dropping it, they continue on, and they get the chance to get the help they need and the benefits they deserve, hopefully before their life hits the ruts that some of those fellows hit back in the 70s and 80s. So I do see some improvement.
Well, when I first retired from the Army in 2001, I had a very good counselor at my transition center, happened to be a personal friend. He was a retired sergeant major who was now a civilian running the transition center. And of course, he encouraged me to turn in a claim for disability along with a copy of my verifiable medical records backing those when I actually transitioned out. So I did that. I followed his advice. I got into my new job, my new home. Within a few months, I got a letter from the VA saying they were reviewing it. A couple of months later, I got a letter back saying I was awarded initially 20% disability for the stuff I filed for. And didn't, I'm like a lot of these other veterans, don't really think about it. You go over time. And, I was 41 when I retired from the military. Wasn't until I got close to my mid 50s that the PTSD came out with a vengeance. And then both my knees, my shoulder, to go along with the other stuff. And the reason why I say I think it had improved some is because when I started all this back again, the VA was really good with me. And of course, I filed completed claims through e-benefits, which I know you're familiar with. And I didn't have a lot of problem. And the one thing that I was really proud of, and the reason why I say that is because it showed me somebody was paying attention at the VA, was when I had my last evaluation. I went back specifically because my knees. And when they did my last evaluation was finally when I got my letter from them, listing me as permanently 100% disabled, and permanently knowing that because of my age and my condition, I would not improve.
Right.
And I didn't know the difference at first. I looked it up and then realized what it meant, of course, was that I was not really due for any reevaluation unless there was something unusual that came up. They considered me permanently at that rating and didn't consider me a candidate for improving as I got older. So that's why I said I think there's been some improvement. And I can see, like you said, even some of the newer veterans, coming out, going back. I'm talking to some of them, and some of them are having more success. And, a lot of times it's not only due to that, but it's due to organizations and companies like yourself and people like you. So, Matt, we're going to take just a quick break here.
Okay.
And when we come back on the other side, we're going to continue our discussion because I do want to continue on and talk to you about exposure sites and then talk a little bit more about some of your experiences that you can share with us. So for those of you watching the show, we'll be right back after this quick break. All right, welcome back, everyone. You've been watching the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. And, of course, our guest tonight is Matt Hill. And Matt, of course, is a managing partner and attorney at Hill & Ponton, PA in Florida. And they specialize in veteran disability law and Social Security law. And Matt's been sharing with us some of the things that they've been doing and putting up on their site. And, Matt, just a kind of a quick continuation there. Something I learned looking at your site, and I haven't had a chance to click on it yet, but I saw that among the exposure sites you had up there, not only the burn pit stuff that was coming out, they got the part of the PACT Act, they have Camp Lejeune, you've got the stuff from Vietnam, but I also saw up there Fort McClellan, and It was interesting because I spent my last 17 years in the Army in the Chemical Corps. And I went through the live agent training facility at Fort McClellan twice during my career.
Wow.
And so I did not realize until I looked at your site that McClellan was considered one of those exposure sites. So that was something that even me at my age and all those years, I learned looking at your website. So that's a good thing to point out to the audience, for those of you that think you've heard it all, seen it all, even somebody as old as me, with as many years as looking at this stuff, I learned something new looking at your site. So I know that you guys, as I said, you guys do PAC law, disability, VA appeals, and you provide all of those services, not only to certain, to clientele who need it, but to people who contact you, referring them to your website and the resources there. So I got to ask you, and if you don't mind sharing with us maybe just a couple of your experiences helping some of these veterans, because I think it would be helpful for those in our audience to hear a couple of those experiences and what you guys have done.
Well, I'll talk to you a little bit about Fort McClellan, because that's one of the more interesting places for us. It's a base that the VA hates to discuss because, as you said, that it was where our chemical engineers went. There is a lot of Agent Orange that is frankly still in the soil there. VA will not admit that on a global basis, meaning we have to fight this claim one vet at a time. They won't admit that there's exposure there. We found this out. There's a gentleman, former Marine, Kerry Baker, in our firm, who led a group from my firm up to the National Archives, spent a week up there researching Fort McClellan, looking for what chemicals were used where. We got maps of the bases kind of laying out what exposures areas were, because what we found, it wasn't just the folks in the chemical corps who were getting exposed and coming up with these crazy sarcomas and just strange cancers. It was the folks who were MPs. It was the women who were training there. And so we were able to kind of diagram the base, look at the timelines as to when Agent Orange was basically being released there. The 80s was a bad time. So Paul, I don't know when quite you were there, but that was a time when they were just trying to get rid of it. Frankly, they said that we didn't have any more Agent Orange, and yet we had this huge store there in Fort McClellan. So we have, and if you were to look on our site, if somebody was at Fort McClellan, we put together this whole group of paperwork and evidence and release to top secret documents from the archives, and we have a pack that we put together to submit for veterans who are there. And that's something we love doing. And again, there's what we have for evidence people can just download, but it's something that we've just seen the VA wrongly deny people again and again and again. And this is a group that all they were doing was training. It's like and the VA tries to deny that these harmful toxins were in the ground there. So that was kind of a really fascinating. We kind of got a whiff that something was off with there. Was it the mustard gas? Was it chemical gas? Those ended up for us being red herrings. What the real problem was, they were just dumping Agent Orange. It was just like they hadn't learned from the prior decades in Vietnam as far as what was going on, and they knew better. They were dumping it on our own soldiers, which kind of got us fired up. But that's
no, I just have to tell you, and I'm sure there's some other people out there listening that are probably scratching their head the same way, because I first attended Fort McClellan in 1985 when I changed MOSs and became a chemical operations specialist, nuclear, biological, chemical warfare specialist. And then I went back in 87 and went to the NBC reconnaissance course. So, I was there. I was actually there 3 different times. And, we always thought more of the bigger exposure you had to be concerned with was in those live agent training facilities they had.
Exactly.
But now you're telling me that, they had Agent Orange there during that time. And, that's why I'm so glad you're on here and sharing this, because, myself, I didn't know. And so I'm sure there's a slew of people out there that may see this and may go, holy crap, I'm in the same book.
We put a lot of soldiers through Fort McClellan too. And it's that's really when they came out with the PACT Act and they said, here's bases across the world, here's countries where we've had exposures. Great. They put a lot of stuff in there, and it's a phenomenal act. But the fact that they purposely left Fort McClellan out really kind of burns me behind the ears. There's too much evidence for that not to be part of it.
So once we're done with the show this week, I'm going to go back and take a look at that part of your site, because I'm just curious now. But so if you have someone who's listening either tonight or watching the recordings of the show once they're posted, that would be a good bit of information and source of reference for them to go to your site. And Cece, would you put the site back up for us if you don't mind? And it'll go, there it is. Thank you. HillandPonton.com to go to your site, and it's easy to find. You'll see the locations listed on the tab on the site that'll tell you exactly where there's exposure sites, and you'll find Fort McClellan among the other ones there for anyone who's out there watching. Yeah, thank you. So we will definitely make sure that we have that up so they can take a look at that. So was there, during this time, and you guys seem like you're doing so much and sharing so much information. Has there been a particular case or something that you guys worked on that really meant something to you or hit you particularly hard, that you'd like to share with us? Because I think it'd be good for our listeners to hear some of the things that you guys are dealing with and trying to help with.
Yeah. I've had a lot over the years. So the ones, I've lost a lot of veterans in the middle of an appeal process. Either they die of some cancer they had. I've had veterans die of suicide. I mean, unfortunately, I'm not talking a platoon size. I could feel the whole company now on vets that I lost along the way, and that always hits me whenever that happens. One great story, I guess I'll say, is I represented a gentleman named Gray, who was a sailor. He was off the coast of Vietnam, and when I represented him back in 2008, I believe he came to me. They had this; it was almost like a wet foot, dry foot thing. If you stepped foot on Vietnam, you were assumed to have been exposed to Agent Orange. But if you were offshore to the point to where your boat was tied up to a boat that was onshore, and that was still considered offshore, you were not granted the presumption of exposure. And so these vets who had the same awful calamities, he suffered from a really disabling heart condition. They just said, no, you weren't exposed to Agent Orange and you're not going to get paid. So we fought. Oh man, that was a good 14 years. I think we fought, and we took it all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States accepts 70 cases a year. That's 70 out of like 10,000. And they accepted our case because it was so egregious. And they pushed down on the VA and said, this is wrong. And the VA, once they realized that the Supreme Court was taking it up, they came back and they said, okay, we will say that veterans offshore were now exposed to Agent Orange. And so that basically included, I think it's anywhere from 400 to 500,000 sailors who then got the benefits they deserved. And so I'd say that's the one I'm most proud of, because Mr. Gray, thankfully, he stuck with me and we fought it. It felt like till the end of time as far as fighting that one. But that when we were able to get him those disability benefits, I was really excited about that, because it helped him, but also helped just a greater number of vets as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible that you guys were doing work that went that high up and affected so many veterans. I mean, yeah, I can understand you really being proud of that in terms of what you guys were able to do, even though, like I said, I know that's not why you're doing it, but just to have that level of effect, and be able to help that many veterans, I'm sure made you guys really happy. So your parents, I guess, were really tickled over that one, huh?
They were. My dad was he was a blue water Navy vet. He flew helicopters, sub hunters off of carriers. And so we looked through his records. We can't tell quite how close he got to Vietnam. He mostly was off Russia, but he did one tour off of Vietnam. And so we think he was within the waters. Unfortunately, he does not have any of those disabilities, but that one was a little closer to home, just knowing that dad, had been on one of those ships.
Well, something I got to tell you, having gone through a lot of this myself, personally and firsthand, and dealing with a number of things that I've had to deal with. And, I feel very fortunate still to be in the position I'm in, because, I'm on the burn exposure registry that they actually contacted me and told me to make sure that I, registered exposure to depleted uranium and Desert Storm on the battlefield, the burning oil wells, and then, finding out now about the stuff at Fort McClellan. And I just feel so fortunate that at least to this point, I'm not suffering from anything that would seem to be related directly, more or less to that. But the work you guys are doing is so important. I mean, getting this word out and providing those resources. Yeah. So that's one that I think, gosh, that's really impressive what you guys were able to do to help that many veterans. So is there any other one that I think maybe might have hit a more personal note for you, or not trying to put you on the spot, but
it's funny. I just feel like a lot of there's a pattern that I've seen that just breaks my heart, and it's the combat vet from Vietnam, and it's like, unfortunately, it's not one case because I've lost multiple. vets who were in this position who just came back, and again, they might or might not have applied. They might not have known they could have applied, and they go through life, and I get to read. My work is really intimate. I take a look at these men and women's lives where I get to see their medical file and what their life looked like. Man gets out of service. He's got 2 kids. He's got a beautiful wife. 6 years later is divorced. He's an alcoholic. He's in and out of rehab, can't keep a job, marries again, divorces again, losing jobs, out on the street. And unfortunately, this isn't one veteran. This is vets I saw again and again. And then they come to us and, they just feel like they've been beaten up. They were drafted into this war they didn't necessarily want to go to, but they did. They served their time, and then they get this horrible mental health condition that people say, oh, you're just crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. And then, we're able to help these people and get them the benefits they deserve. But to me, a lot of times, it just like there's still a pain there in that I kind of wish I would have been able to help this vet when he got out, get him the recognition, the benefits, and the medical care he deserved. And I like to think maybe his life would have been better. And that's kind of what I was talking to you about with some of the vets coming back now, that I see the same patterns. My hope is if they're getting these benefits now, hopefully their life doesn't end on that trajectory, because it burns a hole in you. You see these people and all they did is stand up and serve our country, and then they just come back and they just get thrown away, and it's painful. We've had a couple vets, I'd say a couple dozen vets, to where they applied early on, especially mental health disabilities where they get out, PTSD, and they get denied. And every once in a while, the VA will screw up, or they won't get all the service records, and we'll actually get to take the case back and open up that case in the 60s. My mother actually opened a World War II vets case all the way back to the early 50s and got the veteran hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of benefits.
Wow.
That fought for. So those are, to me, those are great. But I tell you, there's just something about Vietnam vets and just what they went through and what they did for us, and the thankless reception they got, and just seeing that in their files and how that haunted them that just really gets me. And I'm glad to be able to help those guys, but I just so wish I could have been there 40 years ago.
At the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you single that group of veterans out, because, our nation has been trying to do that now too. And in fact, we just recently had a guest on, General Chrysalis, who was in charge of the Vietnam veteran commemorative actions by the government. And then was it March 29th was National Vietnam Veteran Recognition Day. Mm-hmm. And he's led a group of people that he was sharing with us when he came on, that their sole purpose, being appointed by the government and the Department of Defense, was to hold all of these events all over the United States and invite all the Vietnam veterans who were still there around the area, and actually see that they were personally thanked at those events.
Wow, that's
for their service. Yes. And I mean, they're still in the middle of it. They're not done yet. And they had the National Vietnam Veterans Commemoration Day, March the 29th, where they had a bunch of stuff going on all over the country. But they still have that initiative going on now, to where the government has finally realized, like you're talking about, that there's a group of veterans there who were treated, pardon me, like garbage, just because a lot of them, they were drafted too and went out and served their country and came back and were treated very poorly. So it's kind of interesting. I can understand you having that soft spot for those group of veterans, because they seem to have really suffered in ways that they shouldn't have.
I agree.
It's really good to see what you guys are doing. Matt, I got to tell you, man, it's been great talking with you and hearing about all the things that you guys are doing at Hill and Ponton. And I hope that you guys will continue on, because it seems like you're doing so many things that are helpful to our veterans and their families. So I want to ask you real quick before we close, if you had one message you could share with our audience, what would it be? What would you like to say?
Paul, what I tell vets all the time is knowledge is power. And the more you know about the claim you have, the more you know about your disabilities, the more likely you are to get the benefits you deserve. That the VA is supposed to be parental kind of system, and that they're supposed to do it for you, help you get all the benefits. I just don't see that working. And I see the vets who get the benefits they deserve are the ones who kind of, in a way, stick their nose in the book and figure out, okay, what's my medical condition primary? What's my secondary conditions from that? How do I do this hearing? How do I submit the right evidence? Like you submitted all your evidence up front. I highly recommend that. You give them a completed packet and say, here you go. So I just, knowledge is power, and I can't say that enough. The more you know about your disability, the more you're likely to get the benefits you deserve.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you. A very good point. And I actually did an episode of my show a while back where I came on and talked about e-benefits specifically, and how to use the system and stuff like that, because I think that is so important. Knowing what you got, knowing how to do it, and knowledge is the power. So thank you. We appreciate that. All right. For those of you in our audience out there, Matt, we want to thank you again for joining us this evening. And it's been great talking with you, and to the point where I've even learned some stuff myself at this late date and age. So it's actually great to have you on. For our audience out there, don't forget, at the end of each show, we try to provide you with some additional information so that you can share not only with your fellow veterans and their families. Don't forget AmericanVeteransVote.com. We actually had a guest on from that organization not too long ago. And the idea behind this is to get the veterans out. Doesn't matter who you feel like you want to vote for, but veterans, you need to get out there and vote. So there's a lot of good information there on their website. Take a look at it. You can see what's going on and what they're doing. That site, there's some site-specific information, but there's also some general information as well. So take a look at it. For veterans, it's important you get out and vote, exercise those rights that you tried to guard so vehemently while you were on active duty. All right, and thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. And again, we thank Matt for joining us and sharing this information with us. You've been watching the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner, and we hope to see you next time on the streamingnetwork.com. And for veterans out there, again, we want to thank you for your service and hope that you are continuing to strive and live the life that you should.
Thanks, Paul.